Welcome to another episode of the Fight IQ podcast. Today we are doing a deep dive for our main event for the weekend, that is UFC 313, Alex Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev. Martin, why don't you give us your thoughts on this one here?
All right, man. So we kind of got into this a little bit in our predictions video,
Yeah.
but this is a very highly anticipated matchup between Alex Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev. I think there's going to be a lot of keys to victory for Alex Pereira. It's going to be his toughest test yet as far as stylistic matchups go.
Yeah.
I think one of the main things he's going to need to do to negate Magomed's striking is control the lead hand and a lot of hand fighting from open stance, which is where I think the fight is going to take place.
Yeah.
Um, Magomed typically fights in that southpaw stance a lot like Khalil Roundtree did. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like Alex Pereira was able to not only outstrike Khalil Roundtree after making the reads on him in rounds 3 and 4, but
Yeah.
ultimately stay safe from a lot of the big weapons from a what I would consider a lot more successful striker. Um,
Yeah.
Magomed doesn't typically have a high output when it comes to the strikes he's throwing. He likes to be
Mm-hmm.
very calculated and methodical with his striking, and I feel like that's not something that you can really afford to do against somebody that doesn't need to land so much to be successful, like Alex Pereira does.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the first key to victory for me. I think Alex Pereira is going to need to really control the hands to make reads on Magomed, because when you're controlling the hands, you're going to be able to tell when their body is going to make an explosive movement, because you're going to have your hands on them, so you can feel the energy transferring in their body. So you're going to
Mm-hmm.
be able to tell if he's going to be able to strike with you. You're going to tell if he's going to start going for takedowns and stuff if you're in that range and you're having control of their hands. So, what do you think?
Yeah, that was one of the big things that I was looking at too. I went back and watched some of Magomed's fights recently. I watched the Alexander Rakic fight, which I thought was going to be kind of a similar one here, where we had somebody that was going to be in a southpaw orthodox stance, right? Your open stance there. And that was one of the biggest factors, is there was a ton of hand fighting going on. Whether it was Ankalaev initiating it or Rakic initiating it, they were both constantly touching, 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 touching. And then Rakic would throw his big kind of rear side kick. It was one of those where it kind of became predictable. And I think he didn't see a ton of success with it. He made reads and was able to find success with the low kick. But every kind of time he went for that big shot, he was never able to get it. And I think part of that was that hand game that they've been playing the entire fight. So I do think Alex's big key to victory here is winning those hand fights and then making those reads like you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The Khalil Roundtree fight's a great example of that, right? Those first couple rounds, you can see Pereira maybe feeling it out a little bit, maybe not willing to kind of push the throttle right out of the gate. But by round 4, when the finish came, he was really able to understand what he was going to be throwing. He kind of knew when Khalil was planning on throwing things, how he was going to throw them, and was able to kind of situate himself to really start opening up with those counters that led to the finish in the 4th. Ankalaev's one of those guys that seems to really look for those counters. He's really kind of I want that straight shot down the center, especially when people overreach. I don't know that Alex is going to be in a boat to overreach a lot. We don't really see him do that in a ton of his fights. Usually he stays pretty tight. He kind of knows where his limbs are and where he needs to be in order to stay safe. So I think Magomed might be in a situation where he's waiting for something that's not going to happen for him.
Yeah, another thing to kind of talk about, Alex Pereira overreaching. His best
Yeah.
shot being his left hook. That's usually best used when you're retracting and getting back into your stance. So once your
Yeah.
weight is on your lead foot, and you're a little bit out of position, it's good to have that left hook to bring you back into being well balanced in your stance.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that Alex Pereira is really good at, and you can see this in the Jamal Hill finish, um, that when Jamal Hill throws a straight punch
Yeah.
towards Alex Pereira after the low kick, you can tell that he slips his head off center line with the left hook, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that I can see happening to Ankalaev. Maybe he throws that rear straight hand, and Pereira slips off the center line and counters with the left hook. If Magomed
Yeah.
is not able to address Alex Pereira's lead hand and control that, he's going to be in for a long night. One of the strategies that Adesanya had against Alex Pereira was he was really putting a lot of effort into controlling that lead hand of Alex Pereira, and he was
Yeah.
making sure that no matter what he was doing, he was at least addressing the left hand in every
Mm-hmm.
exchange he was doing. He would even commit 2 hands to just guarding that left hand, and it was a really interesting strategy to kind of put yourself open, but when you're fighting Alex Pereira, you kind of got to be a little bit crafty. Another thing he
Yeah.
was doing too was after he would throw straight punches, he would drop his hand and grab Poaton's lead hand as he was coming back,
Mm.
just so that counter wouldn't be there for him.
Yeah.
So, if Magomed Ankalaev was able to watch and do proper film study and see that that is something he could use to his advantage, I can see him
Yeah.
having success there.
Well, I was thinking about it too, and one of the things that I think, when we first all got introduced to Poaton as far as MMA goes back in LFA, PFL, whatever that organization was that he fought in originally, I can't remember right now. But he hit that left hook that I think kind of all proved to us of how dangerous he really is, and it's that one that put that dude out, and it came off of
The
the
head kick.
rear side head kick.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another thing that I saw a lot in the Rakic fight is he would throw that big body, the open stance side kick, but he would never follow it up. He would throw the kick, come back, they'd reset, it would go right back to hand fighting. If Pereira can maybe follow that up with that left hook, I think that's a situation where Ankalaev may not be prepared because he's so used to people returning back to that open stance without that follow-up. That being said, I think one of Magomed's potential keys to victory here is to try and catch kicks.
Mm-hmm.
I think it could be something that was beneficial. I saw it with Walker a little bit. Walker, obviously, one of those guys that kind of just throws all sorts of wild shit and from all sorts of weird angles. But Ankalaev was having success in catching some of those weird kicks and not even trying for a takedown necessarily, but trying to lift him, trying to off-balance him, and then following in with the counter after that. And that could be a situation where if Alex isn't careful or doesn't decide to implement the switch kick, he might end up getting those kicks caught quite often, and maybe that changes the dynamic of how Ankalaev approaches it moving forward.
Yeah, that's going to bring the next key to victory for Alex Pereira in this situation.
Yeah.
Going to be establishing the lead low calf kick.
Yeah.
Since their legs are going to be closer together, that typically that weapon that he likes to use is the rear calf kick, and he's really good
Yep.
at setting it up and being sneaky with it. But since it's going to be the fight's going to take place in open stance, he's really going to have to use lead leg on lead leg calf kicking, and it's just a really technical strike to throw, and it's kind of a little bit awkward. But somebody like Poaton has that unlocked, so
Yeah.
I feel like if he's able to establish that lead calf kick and really compromise Ankalaev's lead leg, then he's going to not only deter the takedowns, because you're going to need that leg to be stabled in order to shoot on him and stuff like that, but
Right.
you're going to take away his locomotion as well. So it's also a very safe kick to throw. It's not something that can easily be countered. It's not something that can be checked as easy.
Yeah.
And it's not really a kick that can be caught, especially if it's to the low calf. So that's going to be something that I can see Pereira having success with in this fight. But yeah, what are you thinking about that?
Yeah, that's one of those situations where I think that's going to be a huge potential counter to, and this has become one of those things where it's a will he, won't he kind of thing. Is Ankalaev going to wrestle him? My instinct says he should. My instinct says that's probably the best way that he gets this done. But I went back and I watched a handful of his fights, and not once did I really ever see him shoot for a takedown.
Mm-hmm.
It really doesn't seem to be his game plan. It doesn't seem like that's really how he's ever wanted to approach it. But I think that's going to be one of those things that he's going to have to do here. He's going to have to introduce MMA to it. We've seen people try and have striking battles with Poaton, and it really just consistently doesn't do them any favors. Even guys like Jiri, who are really kind of unorthodox and doing all sorts of strange strikes and have a weird wide stance, he figured it out, right? He was able to figure it out, and he figured it out twice. Khalil, who's got really incredible Muay Thai, is a pretty highly pedigreed striker, I think, in his own right. Put up a pretty solid fight, but it ultimately ended up being too much.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Ankalaev's going to have to make this an MMA fight. I don't know if his wrestling's that good. We don't really see Alex have to defend a ton of takedowns, but that doesn't mean that it's not available for him. So I think implementing that low calf kick is going to be huge to reduce that threat if it was there at all. And now it's going to become a stand-up fight, and that's where Alex wants it anyway.
Yeah, so now we can start kind of getting into keys to victory for Magomed.
Yeah.
Obviously mixing it up is something that needs to happen if he's going to have success. I don't see him going out there and out kickboxing Alex Pereira and KOing him. I think that if he were to have like a method of victory to this fight, it would either be a submission, which he doesn't typically go for. His submission average is 0
Yeah.
for even attempting it. His takedown percentage accuracy is not the best either. Um,
Yeah.
so it's not something he uses often, and it's one of those things that everyone just assumes that he's a very high level grappler because I just straight up just because he's Dagestani probably, but
Yeah.
it's not a weapon he ever implements in his fights. So we really don't know how his takedowns work against very high level opponents.
Yeah.
I think that with all this time that Pajeda's had in the cage and training, he seems very
Mhm.
disciplined, and I feel like with him training so much in the grappling department with Teixeira, I feel like his takedown defense is going to be adequate enough to really deter takedowns in the long game for Ankalaev. So
Yeah.
we might run into a situation where Ankalaev is struggling to take him down, and he's losing energy because he's attempting so many takedowns and they're getting defended, and then having to strike with Poaton after that because Poaton could strike even on empty. If he's completely
Yeah.
exhausted, he can still strike and be efficient with his energy.
Yeah.
It'll just be interesting to see if Ankalaev is going to be able to wear on him enough to slow him down. Because we
Yeah.
haven't really seen his grappling endurance tested too much. If Israel Adesanya can
Mhm.
take him down and hold him there, like I definitely think Ankalaev can. But it's like, what's your long game? Are you just gonna like
Yeah.
just hang out on top position, or are you
Yeah.
like actually gonna go for ground and pound? Are you gonna go for submissions, which Ankalaev is not known for?
Yeah. And that's kind of an interesting thing because I do think one of Magomed's keys to victory here is being economical with his gas tank here.
Hmm.
He has seen fourth, fifth rounds. We've also seen him slow down in some of those rounds. That's going to be a big key here is if he can't maintain the pace, because he does seem to be one of those guys that likes to pressure. A lot of times he likes to take the center of the octagon. He likes to put his opponents back to the fence, and he likes to kind of reduce that volume that they have to be able to move in. Poaton also tends to be one of those guys that likes to be the pressured fighter here. So it's going to be a situation with how much is he going to be willing to devote to kind of that forward pressure game? And is he going to be worrying about takedowns? Is he going to try and shoot that? Because those are massive energy sucks, especially if they fail. So to me, it's going to be that battle of he has to be kind of wise about how he spends his energy to make sure that he's got it for those fourth and fifth rounds if it gets there, but also not be so passive that he kind of lets the round slip away, starts to kind of fall behind, and then that's when Alex can start to put the pressure on him.
Hmm.
What do you feel? Because this has been the other kind of controversy with this fight a little bit. Is there's a lot of people that feel that Alex has not been training or taking this fight camp as seriously as he has other ones. He's flying all over the world. He's going and doing all this kind of random shit. He's showing up with all these like random people in Japan, and then he's in Toronto, and then he's in the fights. And Ankalaev is clearly taking this as seriously as a professional fighter should. Do you think that Alex isn't worried about this fight, or do you think he's just not showing us the training that is happening? Because we have seen a lot of time spent down with the fighting nerds in Brazil recently. He's been going there pretty often, so I don't think he's not training. I just wonder if he's training less or just being more conservative with his energy, or maybe what his content output looks like.
Yeah, I think Poaton is just one of those people that's always in the gym and that is
Yeah.
always kind of getting after it. He has been kind of traveling like quite a bit lately. He said that he had prior obligations to be in Australia for Sean Strickland's fight, anyways. And when he
Yeah.
was down there, he was still getting the work in. He did a little stint at the Fighting Nerds gym too, so it just seems like he's one of those people that wherever he's traveling to, he's at least getting some work in while he's there. Even when he
Yeah.
traveled to Japan, or I think it was even South Korea, and he was getting to work in with that heavyweight professional boxer. And
Yeah.
so I feel like he's just one of those people that goes everywhere, and he might not always say that he's training with certain people and like getting the work in, but he might not always post it. But I don't think he's one of those people that's going to be undisciplined. I think he's
Yeah.
very professional when it comes to this kind of stuff. And from his Glory kickboxing background, he was very, very, very active. So
Yeah.
I think that this is one of those things where Alex Pereira is just such a professional, and he's going to be training pretty consistently just all year round. He's not one of these people that has to get in shape before camp.
Yeah.
But that being said, I am going to be curious to see if Ramadan has any effect on Magomed Ankalaev, because the fight is taking
Yeah.
place on the first week of Ramadan, and it's typically known that, you know, fighters that celebrate Ramadan and, you know, practice that kind of stuff never take fights during while
Right.
it's active, because, you know, you're restricted to when you can eat and when you can drink water. And
Yeah.
so, um, you know, with the rehydration and all that stuff, how's Ankalaev going to do with the weight cut, all that. So it's going to be
Yeah.
very interesting to see if that has any effect on him as well.
Yeah, you know, and I don't want to necessarily go there, but my brain does think about the concerns around, like, is there going to be IV rehydration allowed? It's never really been one of those things that's completely stated, oh, it's black and white, you can't do it or you can do it. Because there's been times where they've let people do it, and then they say, oh, we shouldn't let that person do it, or the commission said we can, but you actually can't. And you know, it is a concern, especially when you're cutting weight, and the way that often these guys cut weight through that water load. If you can only drink water during certain hours, it limits what you can actually do in training during the day as well. Um, Surely he's got a team behind him, and surely they've thought about this when they kind of came into this game plan here. But I do think that it is going to potentially play a role in how fueled Ankalaev may feel coming into Saturday night. So I do think that'll play a factor. It'll be interesting to see if it's something that, you know, maybe helps him. Maybe, you know, he's in that kind of mindset where he's really focused. He's hyper aware of the one thing that he wants to do right now. Or maybe, you know, the hunger pains and the lack of water plays a role as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and one of the last things I kind of wanted to touch on for Magomed Ankalaev is I do think that, you know, there is a chance that we do start seeing him have success in the striking, because he is
Yeah.
known to have moments in fights. Um, he has a really good straight left hand, and I just feel like, you know, we could see some big moments from Ankalaev. I don't want to say that, you know, Poaton's just going to run through him. Um,
No.
I, but when I'm thinking about how this fight is going to play out,
Yeah.
I do kind of see Poaton embarrassing him a little bit,
Mm.
just because I really rate Poaton striking like way more than Magomed's.
Sure.
And I felt like if Rakic made some very, very tiny adjustments and
Yeah.
had some slightly different corner advice, he probably could have found a finish on Ankalaev.
Yeah.
There was just so many openings I was seeing, if you like, with head kicks that Rakic normally throws, that he just
Yeah.
wasn't throwing that night, in particular against Ankalaev. But that could have been, you know, something that Ankalaev was, you know, prepared for too. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, man. Ultimately, I'm very excited for this fight, and
Yep.
it's gonna be a banger.
I think it's going to be a good one. Well, please like, comment, subscribe down below. Let us know what your thoughts are. Let us know who you think's going to win and how they're going to do it, and we'll find out on Saturday. Peace.
Peace.